I had the distinction of turning down a chance to work with Seth a long time ago, but we don't need to talk about that. I just needed to announce that publicly to all of you so you could say, that woman's crazy.
My loss.
But we've been friends for a long time, and I'm delighted to be here with you. And I was saying backstage to Seth, the first thing I wanted to know was a personal question for me, which was the first time you saw the internet and the World Wide Web, or the World Wide Web, for those of you who know the difference. What happened for you?
I got my first email account in 1976 when I was 16 years old in high school, and no one understood what any of this was back then. Then I was a book packager. What book packagers do for a living is we think of ideas for books and sell them to a publisher and then cause them to happen, like a movie producer, but for books. Starting about 1990, I started making stuff for Prodigy, the beginning of online services, and described it to people in my family, and they said, that's the stupidest thing we ever heard. Why don't you go back to making a living? 91, 92, I started a company that did promotions and sweepstakes by email, so I could work with Prodigy and AOL. There was no World Wide Web. There was no Mosaic. None of those things had developed yet. But mostly I was a book packager. I would sell books to make enough money to fool around with this internet thing. And this is a really, I think, important lesson here. I'm telegraphing it in case you miss it. On my desk in a green box is a T-shirt that cost me $40 billion. What happened the first time I saw what most people now think of as the internet is I looked at that and I said, boy, I bet you there's a good book in this. And sold a book for $70,000 called Best of the Net to a book publisher who ended up printing 40,000 copies and selling 12. Not 12,000, but 12. And it took a team of 6 people 6 months to research and build and create this whole thing, a guide to what was on the internet. And while I was busy doing that, with exactly the same resources, Jerry Yang and David Filo built a company called Yahoo that at one point was worth $80 billion, each one owning $40 billion worth. So my souvenir of that decision is a T-shirt for this book we made called Best of the Net that we gave to the sales force. And the lesson that I learned, the biggest thing I took away, is a lot of times if you have a hammer, lots of things look like a nail. And I saw the internet long before most people did. I was on it. I was building stuff. I had a T1 line. And I said, how do I use that to make my old thing work better? Almost as big a mistake as you not working for me.
Yeah, you're right. But it worked out okay. You
No regrets.
You invented a company that Yahoo bought for a lot of money. But you invented a whole philosophy and started a whole movement called permission marketing, which many of you are familiar with. That's probably why you're here. Can you talk a little bit about how you saw the power of the internet to make it easier to sell things?
Well, I don't think that the internet actually makes it easier to sell things to people. But
changes the way.
I went to business school, got a job as a marketer, had tons of money from venture capitalists to spend. NBC brought us to the U.S. Open, hoping that we would buy TV ads. I mean, it was the classic spend money to get attention mindset. I met Jay Levinson, who wrote Guerrilla Marketing. I ended up writing 3 of the books in the series right when I was able to persuade him to do more than just the books he was writing. So I had been thinking about marketing a lot. And I think that marketing determines our culture more than culture determines our marketing. It is the sort of unnoticed but always seen lever that changes the way lots of things happen. When the internet came along, most people looked at it and said, great, this is TV where you can run free ads. And lots of marketers built websites, lots of marketers put up basically free banner ads, lots of marketers pushed to have rich media slamming in your face because their greedy, selfish mindset was, we have money, we have a product, who can we interrupt, who can we push to go buy it? And I looked at that and realized that wasn't going to scale. And to this day, there isn't anyone who has successfully built an engine where they can spend lots of money interrupting people who don't want to hear from them and turn around and reliably make money back. That's the engine of TV. TV exists for that reason. It's the only reason there's TV is because every time an advertiser spends $1, for 50 years they made $2. And so it scaled. And that's not what happened on the internet. And we always think that the exceptions, the the Googles and the AOLs and the Amazons and everybody else. Those are the exceptions. And we're just waiting for, Revlon or Estee Lauder to figure out how to slam ads that smell so that we'll turn around and buy perfume online. It's never going to happen because that's not what the internet is. It's a connection machine. And connection can't be one-sided. It can't be, I'm here, you may now assault me with your ads. Because when that happens, we just leave. We couldn't leave when there were only 3 channels of TV. We couldn't leave when we're in the car driving by a billboard on the highway. We're trapped. But on the internet, we're not trapped. So I thought about that really long and hard when I started Yoyodyne, which is the company where we met, and realized that permission marketing was not just felt morally better or ethically better, but it actually was going to work. That if you want to hear from someone, you are more likely to listen to them. That seems really obvious. So that when Ted says, leave a business card in the basket on the way out if you want to hear how to get tickets to see Peter Guber, when he writes you the email, you're not going to delete it with the Viagra emails. You're going to read it, right? Because you wanted to get it. And that distinction is really fundamentally brand new. I mean, it's ancient. It's been around for hundreds of years. But as a commercial way of doing business, it's new. And so when we look at everybody who has succeeded in the last 10 years, whether it's Apple or Starbucks or Threadless or 37 Signals or Groupon, all of them are succeeding because they're doing it a new way, not because they're doing it an old way. And so I didn't cause this revolution to happen, but I gave it a catchy name and art-directed a cover that has helped, right? But so my theme going forward, not just for today, but for my life, for the last 5 years, is this is a revolution. This is the industrial revolution of our time. It is bigger than the industrial revolution of 1920. It is bigger than the TV revolution of 1950. And most people are ignoring it. They think they understand it, but they don't, and they keep trying to make it support the old one that's dying.
Is that an age thing? Once the 15-year-olds or 10-year-olds today get older?
Yeah, see, the 15-year-olds and their 10-year-olds are, as Madge would say, they're soaking in it, right? But, see, you can see how old everyone is by how they got that. And so they're not, you don't see a revolution when you're soaking in it. The thing that's going on here, if you look at the way, Sergey Brin at Google said, the first 3 years that they were building Google, they didn't promote it in any way, they didn't advertise it in any way. And he said, the reason is because every day Google gets better. They figure one day you'll discover it, and if they can get you to wait a little longer, your first impression will be better. And that's a revolutionary statement. Can you imagine Henry Ford saying that? I got the company up and running, we're making all these cars, but don't pay attention to Ford, because I'd rather have you notice us a year from now when the cars will be even cheaper. You don't think that way when you have a factory, but you do think that way when you're building a movement.
A lot of what you're saying for the people in the audience who are marketers makes sense, but it also makes sense for people like me and all the people in the audience who aren't selling necessarily a product, but themselves. We're all trying to brand ourselves. We all have to think differently today.
Exactly. See, some people would like to think they're not marketers. Everyone is a marketer. Ted Kaczynski was a marketer, right? And, he was a violent marketer. He was a nut. But of course he was a marketer. If marketing is telling a story to people you want to have hear it and have it resonate with them so they change their mind, and don't we all want to change someone's mind? Get them to date us or hire us or buy our thing or ignore us if they're the cops? I mean, there's lots of things we want people to do. So we market ourselves all the time. Now, marketing has a bad name because it's often selfish, it's often filled with deceit, it's often short-sighted, and it frequently involves yelling at people who don't want to be heard from. Mm-hmm. But there's other sorts of marketing, right? There's the marketing that gets done by a spiritual leader we admire. Or there's the marketing that gets done by a website that does a really good job of making our lives better. And in exchange, they figure out a way to bring us products that make our lives better so that they can make money at the same time. That's all marketing, and I think it's sort of malpractice to say, I don't have to understand it.
This morning on your blog, you talk about how it's bollocks, my word, if you think you don't have an idea. Everybody has ideas. It's executing. But you write a lot about this very real fear that people have. People, that seems to be the biggest impediment that people have toward marketing themselves. Or can you talk a little bit about what you call the resistance and the lizard brain, and just who here hasn't had...
Funny you should ask.
I'm so funny I should have. Has anyone here ever been afraid to do something, to execute something, to move forward?
This is a shark. It's a rubber shark. If it was a real shark, you would be frightened.
I still am, since you have it a little bit.
The thing about sharks that's important to understand
Yeah.
is that last year in the United States, more people were killed by deer than by sharks. And yet, if you go to see Jaws, and you don't go, wait, that's not a deer, right? We're scared to death of these. Why is that, right? And I think it's a worthwhile question to ask. Mm-hmm. We're scared to death of these because prehistorically it was a useful thing to have hardwired, to be afraid of things like snakes and things with jaws and things that could hurt us. And I have another item here. Now this one, some people may use a prop that's an ordinary rubber chicken. That would be the cut rate version. This is a deluxe rubber chicken. I don't know if you can see the tag.
And it's new.
And the question about the rubber chicken thing is, why did the chicken cross the road? And the answer is because his lizard brain told him to. And if we look at the brain of a chicken, it has a brain very similar to the brain of a lizard. It's a prehistoric brain. It's been around for millions of years. It's in charge of revenge and anger and fear and sex. That's all that wild animals worry about. That's what makes them wild animals. The thing about wild animals is it works. That a wild animal that isn't afraid is a dead one. It doesn't have any kids. It doesn't get passed on. Genetically, for millions and millions of years, wild animals have succeeded because this allows them to succeed. Well, the news is this. The news is we have one too. Right up here, above your brainstem, including your amygdala, is what scientists call the lizard brain. You can look it up in Wikipedia. And the lizard brain, if I put you in an MRI scanner and say certain things to you, like, just got a note from the IRS, you're being audited tomorrow, certain parts of your brain light up. Other parts don't, but certain parts do. And what we know is that everyone has things that will trigger this part of their brain. So you're on a plane, 20,000 feet, you're writing a love sonnet on your laptop, and the plane hits turbulence. Now, rationally, you know that turbulence does not cause planes to crash. And yet, you do not keep typing the sonnet. What you do is put your head between your legs and scream. And the reason is because the screaming keeps the plane aloft, obviously. Right? No, that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because the lizard has short-circuited everything. So Steve Pressfield, who lives nearby, is a screenwriter, wrote a book called The War of Art. And he named the voice of the lizard. He gave it a name. It's called the resistance. And the resistance is that voice in your head that says, don't raise your hand at the end of the presentation because people might make fun of you. And it's the voice that makes you change your outfit before you go to a party. And it's the voice that has you, gives you trouble sticking to a diet or applying for a job, short-circuits your resume. All of these decisions that we make that are irrational are being made because the resistance has a loud voice in what's going on. The thing about the revolution that's going on, and that's where it all comes back together, is for 100 years the industrial age wanted people who were afraid. It wanted compliant factory workers, cogs, who would do what they were told. Because if you do what you're told, then you can work in the factory, you won't put your hand in the thresher, and you won't go out on strike. You'll do what you're told, and that means you'll work cheaper, faster, and the owner of the factory makes more money. Just coincidentally, we're suckers for that story, and we got pushed to believe it early on in school, and we can talk about that later if you want, and more and more at work. I better not do that because I'll get fired. Has anyone in your company ever been fired for doing anything like that? No. But it might happen, right? And the people in your company who are, senior vice presidents with coffee boys and expense accounts and a private parking space, did they get that job by doing what they were told every single day, or did they get that job by doing something interesting, innovative, that changed things? Well, yeah, but then why are you afraid of it? Well, it's a very easy thing to get stuck on. So if this revolution that we're living in is no longer about building a building and a workforce and leveraging capital, but is in fact about leveraging ideas and connection, but leveraging an ideas and connection requires this new kind of bravery, then the culprit is the resistance. that the person who read my blog post this morning, I got one email already, no, I don't actually have any ideas. Can you please send me one?
At least they were smart enough to ask you, though.
And so I sent him one, and I haven't heard back. Because what he was looking for was me not to write back, thus having an excuse that his resistance could rely on. Well, if he had just written back, then I would have done something. But since I did write back and say, go to Springwise, which is a blog that has a great business idea every single day, free for the stealing, go for it, right? What's your bluff now? We're all bluffing all the time about the thing we could do, but the resistance talks us out of it.
Well, is it like making the movie or writing the great American novel? A lot of people, or starting a fantastic business, do people think they want to do it, but they just really don't in the end? Is it that they don't really want to change?
See, it's the really. We're all schizophrenic when you think about it, using it in the common form. L.A. is this tar pit for people who are confronting the resistance. You don't really want to put yourself on trial, so you go to L.A. to become a screenwriter because you know it's not going to work. You don't really want to be a famous actress because you go to L.A. because you know you won't be able to become one. It looks like you're going through the effort. But so people come to me and they say, I really want to publish a book. Who should I talk to? And I said, do you really want people to read what you wrote? It's not about making money? Yeah, I really want people to vote. I said, does your computer have a print to PDF button? Print to PDF, post online. If it's good, it'll spread. Next question. Right? That we look for that person we can blame for our novel being unpublished, for our screenplay being unfilmed, for our acting career being unstarted. And we toil away as a waitress waiting to be discovered instead of saying, I'm just going to open a theater on the corner of my street and Judy Garland style put on a show every day. If you do the work, you're doing the work. If you're being a waitress, you're hiding. And that distinction is, there are levels within levels here, but it's at the core of what we've brainwashed ourselves to be.
And Brainwashed, by the way, is a free manifesto from Seth on his website that if you haven't read, it's my favorite, so check it out. That's not why you should read it. You should read it because it's really good. But that you make it sound so easy, Seth. I mean, all of these people out here, we don't have to talk about whether you've had a moment of doubt, because I know you don't want to. But all of these people out here have had doubt. It's not as simple as just saying, all right, I'm just going to do it.
Okay.
Is it?
It's not easy, but it's simple. Those are two different things. It's
things.
really hard, thank God. Because if it was easy, I wouldn't be able to make a living doing this, right? If it was easy, you wouldn't be able to stand out by being the one who ships, by being the one who does the remarkable work. Right? So when I think about my friend Shepard Fairey is a brilliant graphic artist, but so are 50,000 other people.
Right.
So how come everyone knows Shepard Fairey's work and they don't know the other people's work? He did something simple but really, really hard, which is that he risked the rest, he lost sleep, he went out and he put his art in front of people. Right? He gave it away. He used this relentless generosity to put his art in the world, to have it intersect and interact with the marketplace of ideas. And then all these other people who went to RISD were busy getting good grades. Shepard was in the basement making art. And that is the key distinction. And it does nothing to do with visual art. It has to do with whatever your art is. What the internet did by destroying traditional media is it took away the gatekeeper. Right? It used to be that if Lisa really liked your story and she put it on the radio, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 people would hear it. We don't need Lisa to do that for you anymore. You have your own radio station now. You want to make a podcast? Make a podcast. You want to have a blog? Have a blog. You want to write something interesting? Say something interesting. By taking away the gatekeeper, we've taken away your very best excuse. And it's not just a gatekeeper in media. It's a gatekeeper in physical goods. It's a gatekeeper in business to business. It's a gatekeeper in politics. Right? That people are running and putting their ideas out there who never would have been even invited into the convention 10 years ago because they don't need the convention anymore. They can go straight to people as crazy as they are who want to hear the idea and it can spread.
You've built this huge tribe. This is what you're talking about, is finding people who are interested in what your focus is. Joel Spolsky he's a good example of that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of time. How many of you sell to businesses as opposed to consumers? About half the people here. Most of my examples, like my socks, are consumer examples, but that's because you can't wear business examples. Joel Spolsky is a business example. Joel Spolsky runs a little company with 40 people in it that competes every day with Microsoft, the evil empire. And he beats them every day. How does he do that? Well, the first thing Joel did, Joel sells software that helps software engineers do their job better. Joel started a blog that quickly became the best blog on how to become a professional software engineer, not just a paid amateur one. He wrote a few books about how it was done. His following then became all the professional software engineers looking for someone who was leading them. Then he created a job board that became the very best place for someone looking for one of those jobs to get it. Then he created the Joel test, which was a way that employers could answer 10 questions to find out if this is the kind of place great software engineers would want to work. And then as his software started reaching the market, if you're a software engineer and you've got a choice of buying Joel's software or anybody else's, who are you going to buy? You're going to buy from Joel because you trust him, because you know if it doesn't work, you can post a comment on his blog and humiliate him. That he's a real person and that other people you know him and that you've surrounded yourself with them. So of course they buy from Joel, not from someone else. So then Joel turns around and says, you know what we need? We need a board where people can post questions and have other people answer them. And that led to Stack Overflow, which quickly grew to one of the top 5 sites of its kind in the world, which led him to do 5 more of them, and now there's 50 more of them in all these different areas. All because Joel said, this isn't about money. I don't need money to do this. I need a community. I need attention. He earned the attention. He didn't take it. He earned it by saying something that people wanted to hear first, and then secondly, connecting these people to each other. So if you go to Stack Overflow now, what you'll see is even though Joel doesn't go there anymore, there are thousands and thousands of software engineers who are earning badges and points and credit with each other and reputation and getting freelance gigs because they live in this community that he built. And I love the example because, Joel's not a movie star. Joel didn't inherit $10 million. He just did this one step at a time. Any industry you can think of needs a Joel, several Joels. And so the spots are all waiting.
And you need to be passionate. In the internet era, the early internet era, the people who made the money were the people who legitimately started businesses that they had to start, not people who did it just because they wanted to get rich.
Exactly.
What about, we can talk about the concept of Purple Cow, but let me see if I can say, no age to. Lionel Poulain, you say he's remarkable in every way. Tell us why he...
Well, I apologize for not being able to pronounce his name very well. I'm reminded of this by my French-speaking friend. 15 years ago, I became obsessed with making sourdough bread from scratch, like with grape skins, the whole thing. And I found myself in Paris, and I had read about this bakery, the best bakery in the world, called Poulain, on Rue de Cherche-Midi. And I decided that I would buy some starter from them, bring it home. This was before they looked through all your personal belongings when you came home to the United States, and grow his starter in my house and bake his bread. So I walk into the bakery. I speak no French whatsoever, and it's a beautiful little jewel box of a bakery. There's a line outside at all times. And I say, I'll have some of this, and 2 pounds of this, and this, and this. And I said, and half a kilo of raw dough, please. Figuring I just slip that in under the radar. And the woman behind the counter gave me everything. She said, I'm sorry, we can't sell you raw dough. And I said, why not? I'm happy to pay extra for it. You don't even have to bake it, right? And she said, no, I'm sorry, it's not. And I'd read a lot about the bakery, and I said, I'm sure that if Lionel knew that an amateur baker wanted to buy this, he wouldn't mind at all. And this little man walks out of the back, right? And he was wearing a velvet suit. And he's about 5'5". And he said, he came out and introduced himself. He said, come on. And we had breakfast for an hour and a half, the two of us sitting there. And he became one of my dearest friends. Every time I would go back, or I'd find an excuse to go back, we would get together. Once I got a gig to give a speech in Paris, so I flew all night, landed at 6 a.m., went to the farmer's market, bought a whole bunch of stuff, gave my speech, then went to a 3.5-hour lunch with Lionel, and everyone loves him there because he's the most famous baker in Paris, and then got on the plane, flew home, landed at 8 o'clock, took the stuff from the farmer's market, made my wife dinner, passed out. That was a really good day. And so I had a trip plan in November to go see him. And 2 weeks before, he and his wife were in a helicopter. He was the head of the French Helicopter Pilots Association. And it crashed, and they both died. And he left behind a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old. And I thought about his daughters, and I thought about him, and I thought about the impact he had had on me. And I realized that the best thing I knew how to do in that moment was to write a book so I could dedicate it to him. So that's why I wrote Purple Cow.
And Purple Cow is someone,
Being
he embodies
Lionel.
that.
I mean, think about it. By law, he's only allowed to use flour, water, salt, and starter. That's all he's allowed to use. By law, a baguette has to be a certain thing and sell for a certain price, which would mean he couldn't make any money. So he said, I'm not even going to sell baguette. It was the only bakery that I've ever been to in Paris that refused to sell your baguette. And everything about the way he did business, and now the way his daughter Apollonia does business, is all about this art of being remarkable. It's not a manipulation. It's not an act. It's what they believe. No shortcuts. When he decided to go wholesale, what they did was he wanted one loaf, one baker, no assembly lines. So outside of Paris near the airport, he, in a building a little bit bigger than this, he built 12 identical ovens in a circle. And in the center of the circle, 3 tons of dough. And each oven has one baker who goes from the dough, turns around to his oven. And that's the way it's done. And you can't tell the difference between the one from the bakery and the one from the commercial place. I mean, that decision, it's a $20 million a year company. That decision costs his daughter now a couple $1 million a year, but there was no discussion. That's the right way to do it.
They do embody your premise that very good is boring.
Yeah. You know, I mean, if you go there still, I mean, the yen and the franc and the dollar have shifted, but the last time I was there was 8 Japanese women waiting to get in. They had flown from Japan. They were each buying $300 worth of bread, and they were going to fly home. You don't do that for very good bread.
Another person who embodies everything you talk about seems to be Jacqueline Novogratz of the Acumen Fund. People familiar with her?
Right, so Jacqueline is one of my real heroes. Jacqueline saw a need after leaving business school and working for a bank around the world, starting the first women's bank in Rwanda, to enable entrepreneurs to sell to the poorest people on earth. That if you think about it, not microfinance, macrofinance. Build a bed net factory in Tanzania that employs 300 people and sell the bed nets to the people who need them. Because if there's a sale, there's a transaction. If there's a transaction, both sides in the party have power. It's not about, here's a bag of rice, drive away. It's, here's a pair of reading glasses. If you're not willing to buy them, I have failed. So what needs are we going to satisfy? Ordinarily, the way you would build this is you would go get foundations to give you millions and millions of dollars. And you would build the standard nonprofit. What Jacqueline has done is built several tribes of people that are interlocked. There's the tribe of entrepreneurs, the tribe of the people she works with, the tribe of investors who have put money into her company because they believe in the mission, not because it's an ordinary nonprofit. And by having these tribes intersect and understanding that her job is to lead, not to move piles of paper from one place to another or to manage, which is fundamentally different than leading, she has put more than $80 million to work so far and built this organization that's changing all philanthropies, not just the way she does her thing.
Everybody wants to be her.
Yeah.
Management versus leading. That's another important
concept. So the semantics, you may notice if you read my stuff, semantics are very important to me. And the reason is, if you don't know what the word means, then you're not communicating. And if I can play with what words mean, that might help people understand. So a manager works hard to get her employees to do what they did yesterday, but a little faster and a little cheaper. Managers seek compliance, and they seek reliability. Leaders don't know what's around the corner. They're leading us somewhere, and their goal is to challenge the people who work for them to do something that they didn't expect better than they hoped. And you got to think about the fact that when you go to work tomorrow, you're going to choose one or the other, and the person you're working for has chosen one or the other. And if you work for a manager, well, then don't be surprised that you're not getting a lot of congratulations for acting like a linchpin. Whereas if you work for a leader, that's all they're going to settle for. And being really clear with yourself and your people about which it is, I think, is one way to get at the resistance. Right? Working at McDonald's is generally easy because there is no resistance. You go, you follow the map, you do what you're told, you get paid, you go home. You can go through that whole day, every day, for 40 years without once being afraid of what you do at work. And that's a great opportunity for someone who wants to be unafraid all the time. Whereas there are plenty of people who go to work for a leader and they're still afraid, so they pretend, right? When in fact the leader is begging them, the CEOs I talk to are begging their employees to step up and to fail. Fail more often. Because if you don't fail, there's no growth.
Let's go back to the whole idea of, well, actually, no. Let me ask you first about another couple people who embody. L.L. Bean, he's an example of somebody, I can't imagine he had resistance. He just had a great idea. He saw an opportunity and ran with it.
He was one of the original direct marketers. And he was a direct marketer, not in the Lillian Vernon sense of, I got a ton of crap and it's really cheap, here, buy some, but more in the permission marketing sense. What L.L. Bean did was, he didn't have a great idea. He probably stole it, which was the main hunting boot, which rubber on the bottom, leather on the top. But then he did overcome the resistance, because he went to the government of Maine and he got the list of all the people who had a hunting license in Maine. And he sent them all a letter. And the letter said, I make these boots. Want to buy a pair? They're guaranteed forever. Now, there's a whole bunch of things mixed into that story. One, he didn't send the letter to everyone. He sent the people to people who had voted with their dollars to buy a hunting license. He was one of the very first direct marketers to ever use a mailing list. The second thing he did was he said, this is a product that you're interested in, as opposed to just something I can sell to you because I happen to have your address. The third thing he did was he said, and it's guaranteed forever. Like, let me explain. There's a book, I can't remember the title, it was a novel about a guy who goes to Silicon Valley, tries to build a startup, runs out of money, takes all his clothes and ships them back to L.L. Bean for a refund because he needs to liquidate. You can buy a pair of L.L. Bean khakis, light them on fire, drag them behind your car, bring them back to the store, they'll give you your money back. And the reason is it's cheaper to do that than to have a store. That's part of the cost of this sort of interaction, is this ironclad money-back guarantee. So when you put those three pieces together, what you see is that he was able to build this business on the back of people who would miss him if he was gone. That if you love L.L. Bean and you don't get the catalog next winter, you call them. You say, where's the catalog? Think about that compared to, I don't know, Coldwater Canyon, some ridiculous catalog that comes to my house every 2 days. No one in my family has ever bought anything from them, right? And you just know they're just churning and burning until finally someone surrenders and buys something. That's a very different way of thinking.
Duncan Hines. I love the example of...
Duncan. Most people do not know the legend and the wonder of Duncan Hines. So we don't have enough time for the whole story.
Yeah.
The condensed version is he was a printing salesman. And in the 1910s and 20s, if you were a printing salesman, the biggest problem was not rejection, it was ptomaine poisoning. Because when you were on the road, there were no restaurants to reliably eat in. The locals might know a place, but the place you were going to bump into had no standards, there was no health department, you were probably going to get sick. So he started taking notes about where it was safe to eat. One year for Christmas, he got really cheap, and instead of sending his friends a Christmas gift, he just mimeographed, there was no Xerox, mimeographed up his list and mailed it to his 100 best friends. It was the first Sagats, right? And they all said, we want next year's edition. And then it was 1,000 people, then it was 1,000. And he built it until it was this most popular restaurant guide in the history of the country. And from that, he then went to restaurants, and he said, for $300, you can get a sign to put in front of your restaurant that says, I endorsed you. And I get to take it out anytime I want, because he ate like 7 meals a day, always on the road. If I don't like your restaurant, if you break some rule, I'm taking the sign away. So then all these signs supported the restaurant guide, which supported the sign. So this is long before Cake Mix. He was doing all this. The magic of Duncan Hines is he shipped. He saw a revolution going on. Right? When Henry Ford figured out how to make cars cheap, it did not occur to him that one day Duncan Hines and his partner would make $1 billion on the cake mix business. But it was all because of the car. Because no cars, no traveling salesmen, no tourists, no restaurant guides, all of which cycles up. So when I think about Duncan Hines, I say, here's a guy with no money who cared about what he wrote about. He wasn't in it for the money, but he saw the revolution. And so he created a change and had the revolution in his back. And that's the opportunity that so many of us have right now. It's a similar sort of revolution. It's even cheaper to get started and you can do it on Saturdays and Sundays. You don't even have to quit your job.
We're here as guests of the Drucker Business School. What would you tell people in the audience about an MBA? You got an MBA while you were working full-time. In this moment in time, what's your feeling about it?
Well, before you spend that $75,000, $150,000, Google NOBS and my name. It's an article I wrote called The New Order Business School, because I think the two best things business school gives you are the fact that you got in, you can brag about it, it's really exclusive, and the network you build. So my business school would be really, really hard to get into, 3 weeks of networking, everyone goes home. Because the rest is a total waste of time and money. And I am not shy about saying that. If you want to be a business school professor, or you want to work at McKinsey or Goldman, you should go, but only to Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton, or maybe Kellogg, because they don't care about the other schools. But if you want to do real work, to spend 2 years and all that money when you could have launched 5 businesses or gone to work for a nonprofit and turned it upside down and been a leader, I mean, the number of things you can do with that time and money compared to learning the Black-Scholes option pricing formula, which is now free for everyone on Google, I don't get it.
They say that about film school, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Just take the cash and make a movie.
Yeah. I want to... Wait, this is really important, okay? The key thesis here is scarcity versus abundance. Harvard Business School, I can't remember the year, 1950 or something was their best year. Every corporate CEO there was in that class. There was scarcity in 1950. There weren't that many chairs in the musical chairs game. And if you got one of the chairs, you won. There was an enormous amount of scarcity in making a movie in 1972. The number of people who would be handed the money and the film stock and the camera to make a real movie in 1972 was tiny. If you got one of those chairs, you won. So these institutions were gatekeepers for scarcity.
Right.
Now we live in an abundant world. There isn't an abundance of all the things we really need, but there's certainly an abundance of go make a movie. There's certainly an abundance of go start a blog, go start a company, go join a nonprofit for free. All of these doors are open that didn't used to be open. So why pay the toll to go over this bridge when they just built 82 other bridges that are free? And if you're in a hurry, you just saved 2 years. And if you're cheap, you just saved all this money. And you learn more by all these failures than you do sitting there in some class taking notes.
Why is networking a bad word to some people? Some people think it's... But really, life is all about meeting people, knowing people, connecting to people.
Yeah, it's about the semantic thing again. If we have to give it a name, we just turned it into something that's probably not being done for the right reason. Right? It's so that there are people who think that there's a scorecard, and if you've shaken someone's hand, that means you get more points on that game.
Right.
And that somehow who you know on the handshake level influences how you get funded or how you get introduced or whether you get a blurb for your book or something. And those people are a little stressed because they don't know enough people. You can't ever know enough people. So they break certain social expectations in certain parts of the social contract. They're like close talkers, except they're close networkers, right? And so they make people uncomfortable because we're saying, okay, I get that you're sitting here talking to me about this, but are you talking to me about this because you're interested or because one day I'll owe you something, right? Lionel knew that I would never be able to do much for him. Like, I helped him with his website a little, but that's not why he was my friend.
Right.
And I knew that he would never be able to do anything for me. I paid for my bread. I was happy to. That's not why we knew each other. There was a human thing going on. I don't think that's networking, right? I think networking is when someone sends a note saying, I know this person who knows this person who said I should contact you. Well, I don't even know either of those people, and you're busy playing the network game, and then it always ends with, and it can't hurt to ask. Well, I have a blog post called It Can Hurt to Ask. Because by asking, you've blown it. You've identified that you're a hit-and-run driver, and I had something you needed right now, you're coming to get it. And so we are never going to be able to get our relationship back on the right start because we weren't human with each other ever before you asked me for something. So the people who say, I'm networking tonight, I think that is a bad word. If people say, I'm just going to live my life and I like living it around people who are going in the same direction I am, and then if something happens in the future, that's fine, but that's not why they did it.
Right. Big distinction. I asked my friends on Facebook, all many thousand of them.
Your friendlies.
To ask you questions. And one woman asked a question that I thought was terrific for you. And to this point, where does altruism fit in becoming a linchpin? She said, I found I did much better in my search for work when I started seeking and finding work for my friends.
One of the theses in the book is that art is not reserved for the visual arts, that art is a very distinct human endeavor that has attributes to it. One of them involves doing something that's not been done in that way before. Another one involves generosity, because, Pablo Picasso would have been happy to sell you a canvas, but he didn't charge you anything to look at it. In fact, he probably would have been willing to pay you to look at it. That the act of having you see it was a gift from him to you. It wasn't a brochure hoping you'd buy it, right? When he would sell a painting to a museum, he didn't say, oh, that's not good, because now lots of people are going to get to see it for free. There's an abundance mindset. When we think about artists who have contributed to our lives, right, whether it's David Mamet or a visual artist or Bill Shakespeare, these people did it without saying, give me something and I'll charge you for this. It was a gift. And this idea of the gift, as Lewis Hyde has written about, is critical to being an artist. So what I talk about in Linchpin is in a post-industrial world, and I honestly believe that's where we are headed really fast, you're only going to thrive if you're able to act in an artistic way. And part of that involves generosity. Not that networking faux generosity, but true generosity. So when Kelly helps her friend get a job, she's not doing it so that Kelly will owe her a favor.
Right.
She's doing it because that's, in this moment, her art of building a bridge between Kelly and the person who will appreciate that bridge being built. That, ironically, becomes altruistic. That the more generous you are, the more you are able to connect for other people, with other people, and make things better, it turns out, ironically, the better it is for you. And sometimes, from an altruistic point of view, one wouldn't want that last sentence to be part of it. Because then it's not really altruistic and it's easy to manipulate. It's easy to be the person who's always, tell these people what you do for dinner. What is it, once a month or once a week?
Every Friday.
Every
I have
Friday.
a party every Friday.
How many people come?
Anywhere from 3 or 4 to 20 or 30.
And how much do you charge for the food?
Hundreds of dollars of food. Nobody comes for the food.
Right? And is it a cash bar?
There's no money exchange.
So Ayn Rand looks at this and says, what's going on? You're giving people mediocre food, unlimited drink, in your
that they bring,
right, for free. What's in it for you? Do you keep track of who comes often so you know who owes you which favors? Of course not.
Not at all.
So it's altruistic, but guess what? It made your life in LA happier. It made you a happier person, and it's opened enormous numbers of doors. If you hadn't been doing these, you never would have gone to Bhutan, right?
Well,
but you didn't say, I should engage with all these people because one day I'll meet a guy who will know a guy who knows the king, and then I'll get to go to Bhutan.
But now I thank my mother for naturally wiring me that way. I saw that in my home growing up. My aunt used to get angry because non-family members came for dinner. My mother would say, those people are our family just because they're not biologically connected to us. But again, as with marketing, some people are just uncomfortable with the idea that I have to step out, that I have to put myself out on the line. Some people are naturally not open to that.
Right. So
how do they deal with that?
Well,
what do
I
they
have
do?
a big problem with the word naturally, right? Because who knows what that means.
You're right.
But that aside, when I was growing up, I would come home some nights for dinner as the 14-year-old, and there'd be 25 smoking Russians in my living room in Buffalo.
Smoking hot or smoking?
No.
Smoking. Okay.
None of them were smoking hot. Just trust me on this one. And I had never met any of these people. My dad has a factory in Buffalo that makes hospital cribs. He used that as an opportunity to bring tons of Russian refuseniks and other people who wanted to get out of Russia into the United States by sponsoring them. Some of them were brilliant engineers. Some of them were just smokers, right? But now what's in it for my dad to do this? What's in it for my dad to be the volunteer head of the United Way? What's in it for my dad to work on the Studio Arena Theater? He did all these things growing up, all the time, while he had this big, heavy-duty job. And that may not be what you want to do. But then you don't get to whine about the fact that you don't get what my dad got, right? You don't get the respect that my dad got. You don't get the success that my dad got because you didn't do that thing that didn't come naturally to you. Well, my point is the economy used to demand that you dig coal if you want to eat. The economy used to demand that you go to Manchester and sit in a room for 14 hours moving a shuttle back and forth if you want to eat. Those aren't natural things either, but we did them. Well, now what the economy demands is that you just be a generous artist, whether you feel like it or not. And if you can fake it long enough, you're going to not fake it anymore. That really the reason you don't feel like it is not that it's not natural, it's that the lizard's freaking out, right? I walked in and said, I don't know these people. They may not like me. Someone might laugh at me. I might get in trouble. And I run up to my room. That's the natural thing because the lizard hates this. But you can train yourself to say, no. Moving through this new economy is going to be a different thing. It's a connection machine that we're working with.
So Seth 101 is, in a way, do what comes naturally, attack the lizard brain by swimming, taking care of yourself, putting yourself out there.
No, let me, first of all, you mentioned something when we were talking backstage. I love it when people are on stage talking about what they were talking about backstage because it always sounds like it was better than what you got to hear.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
You mentioned that something I wrote, I can't remember where, about all the projects I've done that have failed.
Yes.
Right? The record label I did that was a total failure. The business selling light bulbs door to door to raise money for various bands. The almanacs that I spent huge amounts of my life building that were replaced by the internet. The fundraising things that never took. Way more than have succeeded. The key for me is you got to fail in ways that don't wipe you out of the game. If you had to keep playing the game, failing is just moving the thing around the board. That's got to be part of the deal. If you are insisting that you want to succeed but that you always have to succeed, you will not succeed. That you can't be Jeffrey Katzenberg unless you're willing to make movies that everyone hates and no one goes to. It's the only chance you've got to make Shrek, right? Because if everyone has to work, you're just trapped.
Right.
So for me, I don't soothe the lizard brain by, eating vegetarian food or swimming. It's my friend. The monsters are here. Welcome. Come on in. Let's have coffee. Tell me specifically, what is it that you're afraid of? Because that's what I'm going to do. Whatever it is that you're the most freaking out about, now I know what the right thing to do is. That. And once you turn it into a compass, it becomes way easier when everyone else is doing the thing to be interesting and unique and remarkable, because everyone else is afraid to do that thing. So when people say, oh, our business is a purple cow because I declared it to be so, and it's remarkable because of blank, my point is, well, first, I'm not in charge of what's remarkable, the audience is. But secondly, did it scare you to do that thing? And if it didn't scare you, then it almost certainly isn't remarkable.
Sounds very Bhutanese Buddhist to me.
I hope so, but without all the hot sauce.
Right. What would you say to a 50-year-old, lost their job? There are a lot of people like this. The industry they were in isn't coming back. What would you recommend to them besides reading?
So the first thing is congratulations, because think about the 50-year-old who's working at the Detroit Free Press or the Daily News in New York. This guy thinks he has a job, he hates it, and he's afraid to leave.
Right.
So he's got 15 more years of doom, which you don't have to deal with. So that's why it's congratulations. Congratulations number 2 is, we don't have the perfect economy to be out on your own like this. Your health insurance is going to be a big issue too, and those are big. I'm not diminishing either of those.
Right.
But because there's a clean slate in front of you, this is the moment to challenge the lizard. What have you got to lose? You already lost the thing that you were worried about. So don't go make a resume that looks like everybody else's resume to get a job just like you used to have, because you're not going to get it. They're going to hire some cute 30-year-old instead of you, right? So given that that's the case, it's about figuring out something that you can create scarcity around that people will pay for. That's why it's probably not a good idea to open a traditionally oriented music label, because music isn't scarce. There's more music than there's ever been in the history of the world, listened to by more people more often. We don't have a music scarcity problem, a music shortage, so no one's going to pay you for digital music. Don't start that. On the other hand, there's lots of other things that we do have a scarcity of, like connection. So if you could figure out how to assemble 20 people who needed to be assembled in a way that created huge value for those 20 people, they would wait in line to pay you the second time, because that connection wouldn't have happened if you couldn't figure out how to make it. Right? You want to throw a conference that matters, that puts the right people in the room, regardless of who the speakers are, you can make money doing that every single day. You want to put together a directory that's extremely obscure that helps, people who publish 4-color books find the 20 printers in China that want to print 4-color books. If you can create that connection, which currently doesn't exist, and it becomes easy to find on Google, and all the printers are eager to be listed number one, and they're bidding against each other to be number one, and all the people who do printing who buy printing are eager to list who they bought it from and what the quality was, that's $1 million business right there. I mean, there's no shortage of these. They don't cost any money to start. You just have to be willing to go at it in a way that freaks you out, because otherwise it's boring and we don't need it.
I have so many other questions. Can I just read a couple of your words of wisdom? No, there's got to be a better way to use the last question.
Do you want to ask why my socks don't match?
Oh, I never saw the bottom one.
Have you all heard this story? I'll tell it one more time. So 7 years ago, a company in Mamaroneck, New York said there's a lot of 12-year-old girls out there with a problem. And their problem is that they don't have enough to talk about during recess. Now, not all 12-year-old girls, but many 12-year-old girls. And so they lobby their parents, their moms, to buy them a new outfit every day so they'll have something to talk about during recess. That's expensive. So 2 people in their 20s with no cash whatsoever said, we will make something to help these 12-year-olds with their problem. Turns out that you can get socks in China for a nickel a piece, 10 cents a pair. You could, if you wanted to, bring them to Bentonville, Arkansas, sell them to Walmart, who will put them in stores for a quarter. You'll make a little bit of money, but you will be replaced as soon as someone brings them cheaper socks. Well, what Little Mismatch does is they make 133 styles of socks, $10 for 3 socks. None of them match. And so they're not for everyone, but there's a certain kind of fashion-forward 12-year-old girl who gets really excited. And she goes to school, and at recess the first day she runs up to her friends and she says, want to see my socks? That one sentence changes everything, because now all the other girls in this clique, not everybody, but all the other girls in the clique go home and say to their mom, I need new socks. And so the socks become a badge for the tribe, because they're worth talking about, because there's 133 styles, because it's a fashion business that just happens to use socks. And people who heard this story when I wrote about it in Purple County, they go, yeah, it's just a silly little hobby. Last year they did $40 million in revenue. They have a store in Grand Central Station, they have furniture, they're growing. Why? Because they're not a sock company. They're a tribal organization company. They create badges and stories and ways for a group of people to connect with one another that's worth way more than $10. And I've worn a different pair, but their socks every day since the book came out to remind me that it's not that hard. It's simple, right? That the hard part is to say, there's a revolution. Let's not waste it.
No better way to end. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for coming. Thank you. Thanks, Pat.